The twin suns of Valara shone across the sky like golden shields pulled by invisible hands, and the ground beneath. The great arena trembled with the rhythmic footsteps of young warriors in training. Their bodies moved with precision and speed, their minds sharp with the pride of their lineage, and their hearts beating to the rhythm of centuries of tradition. Among them moved the daughter of General Rila, the famous warrior who once fought alongside humans in the Great War. The daughter's name was Lyra, and her spirit burned brighter than her peers, but it also carried a sharp edge of arrogance that had grown with every medal she won in combat trials. Lyra's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and boredom. As she moved through the training grounds, her long braids swaying behind her like the tail of a comet. She believed no one could match her skill, no one could rival her strength, especially not the awkward creatures who once called themselves allies in the war, humans, who fought with fire and noise rather than grace and discipline. They were slow, clumsy, emotional, and weak. At least that was how Lyra saw them. To her, they were relics from a time her people had outgrown, and she never expected to face one in the flesh. Not until the day of the Unity ceremony, when the Alliance members gathered to honor the ancient pact. That day the Grand Hall was filled with representatives from many worlds, warriors in ceremonial armor. Flags from different systems hung from the tall pillars, and a sacred silence fell as the elders walked in. Lyra stood near her mother, her stance proud, her armor polished, and her chin lifted slightly higher than needed. The ceremony was not something she cared for, but she knew how to play her role. She wore her pride like her armor, bright and unyielding. Then the human walked in. He was not what she expected. He was not young nor impressive nor tall like the stories had described. His uniform was simple, worn from years of service, and his boots carried the dust of many worlds. His face was lined with age, and his eyes held a quiet that felt too heavy for such a peaceful day. His left arm was mechanical, his right eye flickered faintly with an artificial glow, and his back was slightly bent from years of carrying burdens. No one ever asked about the hall was quiet, but Lyra's laugh broke through like a crack in glass. She didn't try to hide it. She pointed at him and whispered loud enough for others to hear, though soft enough to pretend innocence. "Is that the mighty human soldier from the stories?" she said, her voice soaked in mockery. "The one who saved galaxies, that one looks like he needs saving himself." Her friends snickered, not out of agreement, but out of fear of going against her. The human said nothing. He looked at her for a moment, only a moment, and then looked away. But something in his gaze struck like a silent arrow, not sharp, not angry, just distant, like he knew something she didn't. Her mother did not laugh. Her mother's face tightened, not in rage but in quiet disappointment. After the ceremony, she approached Lyra, her steps slow but firm, and said, "Come with me now." Lyra followed reluctantly, expecting a lecture about manners or behavior, but what she got was not that. Her mother took her to a quiet chamber, a room lined with war banners and old weapons, the smell of steel and ash still lingering, as if the past itself had been sealed inside. "Do you know who that man is?" her mother asked, her voice low and steady. Lyra rolled her eyes and said, "An old soldier, probably retired and dragged here out of pity." Her mother turned and looked at her, not with anger, but with something far more serious. "That man," she said carefully, "is your father." The words did not make sense at first. They floated in the air like feathers refusing to land. Lyra stared at her mother, unsure if she had heard it right. "What do you mean, my father?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. Her mother stepped closer, her hand reaching for an old photograph tucked behind one of the banners. She handed it to Lyra. The photo showed a younger version of the same man standing beside her mother, their arms touching, their eyes filled with something Lyra had never seen in her mother's face before, something soft and strong at the same time. "He saved me during the siege of Nerul," her mother said. "He crossed the burning field alone, took a blade through his side, and carried me to safety when no one else could reach me. We fought together for many years. He was not just a warrior. He was a part of me." And from that came you. Lyra shook her head, unable to accept it. You said he died in the war, she whispered. Her mother looked away, her silence holding too many truths. He left, she said, after the final battle. He believed it was better if I raised you here among your people, without the weight of two worlds. But he came back today for the first time, and you mocked him. The words hit Lyra harder than any weapon. Her knees weakened, but she stood still, her heart hammering like a drum gone wild. No, she said, you are lying. You just want to teach me humility. Her mother did not speak again. She simply left the room, leaving Lyra with the photo, the truth, and a silence that seemed to stretch across the stars. Lyra looked down at the photo once more, and for the first time she saw the human, not as a relic, not as weak, but as something else. Something she couldn't define yet. Her hand trembled slightly, and a cold wind moved through the chamber, whispering of stories, buried too deep for songs and names too sacred to speak aloud. She did not know what to feel, but she knew everything had changed. The night was heavier than usual, and the stars above Lyra seemed dim, as if hiding behind a veil of unspoken truths. Lyra sat alone on the balcony of her mother's quarters, the photo still clutched in her hand, as if letting it go would make the truth disappear. Her chest felt tight, her mind racing with thoughts she had never dared to think before. The man she mocked in front of everyone, the one who stood silent as her words cut through the air like blades, was her father, not a stranger, not an outsider, not a ghost from another world, but her own blood. She wanted to scream, but the silence around her was too deep. It swallowed her voice before it could rise. She wanted to throw the photo off the edge of the balcony, but her fingers wouldn't release it. The image stared back at her with a calm she couldn't match. Her mother had spoken those words with such certainty, with such quiet sorrow, that Lyra couldn't find room to argue. The truth was there, in the eyes, in the old scars, in the silence that followed her laughter. It all made sense now, and that was what scared her most. The door behind her creaked open, and her mother stepped out, her armor gone, her face bare, not the face of a general, but of a woman who had carried secrets heavier than weapons. She stood beside Lyra without speaking, and together they watched the winds move through the trees below. Lyra spoke first, her voice dry and slow. You should have told me. Her mother nodded once, not as apology, but as acceptance. I should have, but I didn't know if you would understand. Lyra turned to face, her eyes sharp with confusion and pain. You let me believe he was dead all this time. Her mother looked out at the sky, her hands folded before her. He chose to leave, and I chose to let him. We thought it was better for you. We were wrong. Lyra stood suddenly, the photo still in her hand, her breath uneven. I said those things in front of everyone. I mocked him. I insulted him. And he just stood there and took it. Her mother's voice was quiet, but steady, because he didn't want to cause you pain. He only came to see you once from afar, but when he heard of the ceremony, he asked to be allowed to attend. He wanted to see who you had become. Lyra stepped away, her thoughts crashing into each other like waves on metal. Her pride, her identity, her place in the warrior world, all built on the belief that she was pure, that she was born of the strongest blood. Now she was being told that half of her came from a race she had always dismissed as weak, as emotional, as distant from the way of war. But what did that make her now? Not less, not broken, but different, and she didn't know what to do with that. She left the room without another word, moving through the corridors like a ghost, her footsteps light, her presence unnoticed. She reached the training grounds, now empty under the night sky, and walked to the edge where the stone path turned into wild land. Without thinking, she kept walking, her feet carrying her past the lights, past the guards, past the safe lines of the city, and into the wilderness beyond. The land was dark and alive with sounds of distant creatures, the kind she had trained to fight but never faced alone. Her breath grew faster, not from fear, but from the weight of everything pressing down on her. She needed air, she needed silence, she needed to be away from the eyes, from the expectations, from the truth that felt too big for her armor to hold. She walked until her legs ached, and the stars above her shifted positions. A sudden growl snapped her out of thought, and she turned sharply. In the shadows ahead, eyes glowed low to the ground. She reached for her blade, but the sound of claws on stone told her she was not facing one creature, but several. Her heart pounded as shapes emerged from the darkness, slender bodies, covered in dark fur, long teeth, sharp as broken crystal. She moved into stance, her feet planted, her arms raised, but something inside her trembled. She was not on the training field. This was real. The beast circled her slowly, watching her every move. She slashed at the closest one, but her blade missed by a breath. Another lunged and grazed her arm, its claws tearing through fabric and skin. She fell back, her mind racing, her breath sharp and shallow. Her vision blurred for a moment, and that was all the creatures needed. Then a flash of light exploded from the side, and one of the beasts fell with a sharp yelp. Another followed, the sound of impact, followed by the crackle of energy weapons. Lyra turned to see a shadow moving fast, controlled a figure, fighting not with elegance, but with precision. The human soldier moved through the beasts like wind through fire, using short, calculated strikes, each movement meant to end the fight, not extend it. One after another the creatures fell until only silence remained. He stood over her, his breathing steady, his one good hand reaching toward her. She stared up at him, his face framed by the faint light of his weapon, his expression unreadable. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice deep but calm. Lyra looked at her arm, blood dripping slowly, but she nodded. "I can walk," she said, her voice uneven. He said nothing more, just helped her up with a strength she had not expected. They walked in silence for a while, back toward the city, her steps slower, now her thoughts heavier. "You saved me," she said finally. He did not look at her, just kept walking. "I would do it again," he said, "because you are my daughter." She stopped walking, turned to face him, her eyes wide with a storm of questions. "Why did you leave?" she asked, not with anger, but with aching curiosity. He looked at her, then really looked at her, his eyes full of something ancient, something tired and tender. "Because I wanted you to grow without the weight of what I was. Because I thought you would have more strength if I was only a memory. But maybe I was wrong." She said nothing more, just followed him through the night, the path back to the city, slowly coming into view. The stars above them, clearer now, the wind, softer, the truth heavier than before, but no longer hidden. The morning came, with a soft breeze rolling across the high hills of Villara, carrying with it the scent of iron-rich soil and fresh dew resting on the grass. Lyra sat outside the city walls on a stone ledge, her injured arm wrapped in cloth, her eyes fixed on the valley below where the trees swayed like waves on a green sea. Sleep had not come to her, and though her body was tired, her mind kept spinning. Thoughts around like stars caught in the pull of gravity. She kept seeing his face, the quiet eyes, the rough voice, the scars, the way he moved like someone who had seen everything and still chose to fight. She looked at her hand, the same hand that once held a blade with pride, now trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something unfamiliar, something that made her feel open and exposed, like the walls around her had been torn down without warning. She thought about the beasts, the way they had circled her, the way he had moved through them with no hesitation, no flair, just purpose. She had always believed strength came from tradition, from discipline, from training. But what he showed was different. It was the kind of strength born from pain and survival, the kind that didn't ask for recognition. The city behind her was waking up, its lights glowing softly, its people beginning their daily routines, unaware of the storm that had settled in her chest. She had not spoken to her mother since returning with him that night, the silence between them thick with questions too heavy to lift. She hadn't seen him either, not since he handed her over to the healers and walked away again, his back straight, but slow, as if each step was taken with effort, not from injury, but from something deeper. Lyra rose from the ledge and made her way toward the older district where few traveled, now a place filled with ancient stone homes and abandoned halls. She knew from memory and instinct that he would be there, away from the noise, away from judgment. As she walked the path, her mind returned to the stories she had ignored for years. Tales of humans who stood their ground against enemies twice there. Sais who refused to break, even when outnumbered, who fought not for honor or glory, but because they couldn't watch others fall. Her people had called them reckless, short-lived, desperate, but now she wondered if that desperation was what made them powerful. She found him sitting on a bench beneath an old tree, its branches twisted like the lines on his face. He did not move. When she approached, only lifted his head slightly to show he had noticed her. She sat beside him without a word, her fingers running across the edge of the bench, as if searching for something to hold on to. "I want to understand," she said at last, not looking at him. "I want to know what kind of warrior you are, what kind of person you are, because I feel like I don't know anything anymore." He nodded slowly and reached into the pouch beside him, pulling out a small round object, dull silver in color with faint markings. He placed it in her hand and said, "This was given to me after the Battle of Varnax. I lost 2 ribs and my left lung saving a platoon of soldiers who never knew my name. I never told anyone. Not your mother, not the elders. Just kept it because it reminded me why I fight. Not for medals, not for stories, but because I couldn't let them die." Lyra turned the metal in her hand, its weight surprising for something so small. She looked up at him, her voice softer than before. "Why did you never return?" He exhaled slowly, his eyes staring into the trees. "Because I was afraid," he said, "not of battle, not of death, but of you hating what I am, of you growing up ashamed of a father who was not like your people, who didn't speak with pride, who didn't walk like a general. I thought you would be better off without my shadow, but I wasn't," she said quickly, her voice almost breaking. "I needed to know you. I needed to know the truth." He turned to her then, and for the first time, she saw tears in his eyes, not falling but held like warriors hold shields. Not out of weakness, but because letting go would mean losing something precious. "You look like her," he said with a small smile. "But you think like me more than you know." She stood and stepped back, her hand still holding the metal. "Then teach me," she said. "Show me how to fight the way you do, how to move, how to think, because I know how to strike with precision, but I don't know how to survive like you did." He looked at her, surprised, then proud. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded once. "Then we begin now." He led her through the old training field once used by early warriors who relied more on instinct than style. He showed her how to move without noise, how to use her surroundings, how to fight when her body was broken, how to win with nothing but willpower. She failed many times, her balance off, her instincts dulled by years of rigid training. But he never raised his voice, never mocked, never looked disappointed. He guided her with patience, letting her fall, letting her struggle until she began to feel the rhythm of something new. Her body ached, her muscles screamed, but her spirit surged. For the first time she was learning not from books, not from drills, but from something real, something alive. She began to understand the way he fought, not as a soldier bound by orders, but as a survivor shaped by necessity. He was not trying to prove anything, he was simply trying to stay alive and help others do the same. As the sun dipped behind the hills and the shadows stretched across the ground, Lyra stood in silence, her breathing heavy, her hands shaking, but her eyes glowing with something fierce. He walked toward her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have more than my blood," he said. "You have my fire." She nodded, unable to speak, her heart too full, her mind too quiet. In that moment, she felt it, not shame, not fear, but connection, a thread between them forged in silence and battle and truth. And for the first time she did not feel torn between two worlds. She felt whole. Days passed like drifting clouds, heavy and slow, each carrying pieces of truth that Lyra had once refused to see. Now they followed her into every corner of the city, like shadows that would not fade. She trained with the human soldier every morning, before the suns rose, her body moving through harsh lessons, her muscles aching under new ways of movement, her mind adjusting to a discipline that came not from glory or applause, but from necessity, from survival, from instinct, that could not be taught in royal halls. Man, her father rarely spoke unless it was needed, his voice always calm, always measured. And never wasted. His silence was not cold, it was patient like stone beneath water, unmoving, yet always present. Lyra began to understand this silence slowly, like a song with no melody, only rhythm and feeling. She started seeing the world not in lines of rank or titles or achievements, but in action and effort, in the choice to stand even when strength ran dry. Back at home, her mother watched from a distance, saying little but always aware. Lyra could feel it in the way her meals were prepared, carefully, in the way extra bandages appeared in her room after every training session, in the way no questions were asked, yet no answers were demanded. It was the quiet support of someone who had let go of control in order to give space to growth. One night, as the air cooled and the sky burned with violet clouds, Lyra sat alone inside the war archives, a place she had avoided for most of her life. The room was filled with old data screens lined with records from the years of the Great Conflict, where her people and the humans once fought side by side against something darker, something that had nearly destroyed them both. She activated a screen and began watching battles one after another, each recording showing humans in action, their movements rough but effective, their voices filled with panic and hope, their eyes burning with fear and fire. She watched her father in one of the older recordings, standing in front of a collapsed tunnel, wounded, holding a heavy rifle as others crawled behind him to safety. He didn't run, he didn't shout, he simply stood and fired until the enemy fell, or the gun ran dry. Then he used his hands, then his broken knife, then his fists. He collapsed only when the last soldier had made it through. Lyra's heart tightened, her breath caught in her chest. Her father had done this not for medals, not for reputation, but because no one else would, and because others needed someone to hold the line. She realized in that moment what she had ignored her entire life, that strength was not only in perfect form or technique, but in sacrifice and courage, in the willingness to endure without praise. She walked home slowly, the night wind tugging at her cloak, her thoughts louder than the city around her. When she entered her quarters, her mother stood near the window, her eyes reflecting the distant lights. They looked at each other, not with challenge, not with distance, but with quiet respect. He was always brave, her mother said, and I was proud to stand beside him, but I feared what it would cost you. Lyra stepped closer and said, I am not ashamed of his blood. I thought I would be. I thought it made me weaker, but I feel stronger now, more real. Her mother nodded and reached out, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Then wear that truth like armor, because a time is coming when we will need more than tradition to survive. The next day, a transmission shook the city. The outer colonies had gone silent. Reports spoke of attacks from an unknown force, swift and ruthless, striking without warning. Communication lines burned, supplies vanished, outposts destroyed before they could respond. The council called for emergency meetings, but old fears returned. Humans were blamed again. Suspicion rose like smoke, choking reason. Even after years of peace, the memory of war still left cracks in the foundation. Lyra stood before the council chamber, filled with voices speaking over each other, trying to find a name for the threat, a cause, a scapegoat. She stepped forward, her voice rising above the noise. I know who can help, she said, her eyes moving across the room. I know someone who understands what it means to fight against impossible odds and survive. The elders turned toward her, curious and cautious. And who would that be? She turned to the door, and it opened slowly, her father stepping into the chamber, his presence quiet yet solid, his face familiar to few, but recognized by all through the marks of time. The murmurs began, whispers of doubt, whispers of shame, whispers of fear. But Lyra raised her voice again. This is the man who stood when others fell, who fought when hope was gone, who saved lives without asking for thanks. He is human, yes, but he is also a warrior. And he is my father. The room fell silent for a long breath, then another, until one voice broke the stillness, one of the elder warriors who had served during the war. One, remember him, he said. He saved my brother at the siege of Drengak. Without him our line would have ended there. Another spoke, and another. The tide began to shift, not with cheers or clapping, but with recognition with slow nods and softened expressions. Lyra stood tall in the center of it all, her father beside her, her mother watching from the edge of the chamber. Her heart beating with purpose and unity, she saw not just her people but humans. Two warriors who had once stood apart, now facing a threat that did not care for race or past, only power and fear. She volunteered for the mission to the outer colonies, not because she wanted glory, but because she understood the stakes, and she asked her father to join her, not as a favor, not as forgiveness, but as an ally, as an equal. He agreed with one nod, the same calm resolve in his eyes that had never changed. The council approved the plan, and for the first time in years, humans and her people prepared to fight together again, old fears buried under new trust, forged not by speeches, but by truth shared in blood and silence. As they walked out of the chamber, the night waiting beyond the gates, Lyra felt a new kind of strength rising within her, not the kind that needed to prove itself, but the kind that knew its worth, the kind that came from accepting every part of who she was. And now she was ready to fight, not just for survival but for the future of both her worlds. The ship broke through the clouds like a blade through silk, the sky turning from silver to shadow as they entered the atmosphere of the forgotten colony, where silence had swallowed every signal, every call for help. The world below looked peaceful from above, but Lyra knew better. She stood at the observation deck, her armor polished not for display, but for duty, her weapon strapped tight, her heart steady. The man beside her, her father, adjusted the final settings on his old rifle, one he had carried through fires and storms, his hands moving with a calm that no training could teach. Around them the unit prepared silently, half human, half alien warriors, each handpicked for skill and trust. Not rank, not blood, not legacy. This was not a mission for glory. This was survival, a chance to show the strength of unity, not in words, but in action. Lyra turned to her father and said, "Whatever happens down there, we stand together." He looked at her and said, "Always." The shuttle touched down near a ruined outpost, its walls broken, its towers collapsed, smoke rising from places where machines once hummed with light. The silence here was not peaceful, it was wrong, thick like a warning. The team moved in formation, scanning every corner, every shadow. Lyra led the charge, her steps careful, her senses open, her eyes searching for movement. Then it came fast, without sound, without shape. Figures made of shifting armor and cold fire descended from the hills, their weapons strange, their tactics wild. They moved like a storm of blades and sparks, attacking without mercy, without fear. The first strike caught two soldiers off guard, their screams lost in the sudden chaos. Lyra shouted commands, her voice cutting through the panic. She moved like wind, sharp and fast, her blade finding gaps, her instincts taking over, her training combining with the lessons her father had given her. Fight to survive, fight to protect, fight not with pride, but with purpose. Her father was beside her, always watching her back, his strikes not fast but exact, never wasting motion, never missing his target. They fought side by side, not as strangers, not as student and teacher, not even as father and daughter, but as warriors forged from different fires, standing in the same storm, blood flowing not from fear, but from courage, from belief that what they were doing mattered, not just for today, but for the generations that would follow. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, time bent under the pressure of battle. But slowly the enemy began to fall back, not because they feared death, but because they met resistance, stronger than they expected, stronger than they believed possible, in a force made of two peoples once divided. When the final enemy fell, the world seemed to pause. Silence returned, but it was different, not hollow, not heavy. This silence carried the echo of victory, of survival, of something born in fire and sealed in unity. Lyra stood in the middle of it all, her armor scorched, her blade chipped, her chest rising with each breath taken, not in pain but in triumph. Her father walked to her, his body bruised, but his eyes bright with pride. "You fought like more than a soldier," he said. "You fought like someone who knows who she is." She looked at him, and for the first time she smiled, not because the battle was over, but because something inside Her had found peace. I know now what I carry, she said, and I am not afraid of it. They returned to the city days later, the sky above welcoming them with light. The people, waiting not with cheers but with silent honor. Warriors understand that true victory needs no celebration, only remembrance. Lyra stepped forward before the council, the elders, the young, the families of those lost. She spoke not as the general's daughter, not as the human's child, but as both. She told them of the battle, of what was faced, of how strength came, not from one side, but from both, how unity had turned the tide, how trust had been the true weapon. And as she spoke, others listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because they saw in her something real, something that belonged to them all. Her father stood behind her, never speaking, only watching, always silent, but his presence louder than any speech he had given. His story now told through her voice, her actions, her truth. In the weeks that followed, changes began, not through laws, but through hearts. Training halls began to include both techniques, ancient and new. Children were told stories, not of one people saving the galaxy, but of two standing together. The old statues in the square now had new names engraved beside them, names once forgotten, now honored again. Lyra returned to the old training grounds one morning, standing where she had once mocked a man she did not know. Now she trained new recruits, guiding them through movements of speed and survival, teaching them balance of discipline and instinct. She carried both traditions in her hands, and neither felt heavy anymore. Father no longer wore armor, but walked the halls, offering quiet advice, fixing broken blades, sharing food with young warriors who listened to his stories, not for thrill, but for truth. He never asked for respect, but now he received it, not because of blood, but because of the life he had lived. One evening, Lyra stood by the same tree where they had first spoken, where silence had once held all her questions. Now it held only calm. Her father sat beside her, and they watched the stars together, not in silence, but in understanding. She turned to him and said, I used to think strength meant standing alone. Now I see it means knowing when to stand together. He nodded once, his eyes soft with the weight of time, and said, strength is knowing who you are and choosing to carry it forward, no matter the weight. As the sky darkened and the world slowed around them, Lyra felt something settle inside her, not a title, not a crown, but something greater, a legacy, not built on names or borders, but on truth lived and shared. And in that quiet moment, she whispered to the stars above, he is not just my father, he is a human, and that is enough. The end.